I spent more than 10,000 hours in the field of psychology and worked together with more than 500 people, and along the way, I became a psychotherapist. In this video, I want to share the most important lessons that I learned so far. You will learn how anxiety, procrastination, an eating disorder, low self-esteem, and any other struggle can be pinned down to the same underlying topic that is being tackled in therapy. You will learn how your grandparents affect your personality without you knowing, and why and how I include my own feelings as a therapist in the therapy session, and sometimes even share them with my client for the sake of progress. Becoming a psychotherapist in Germany takes you almost a decade, and it also requires you to go through more than 100 hours of psychotherapy yourself. So I got psychotherapy as well. And if you would have asked me a couple of years ago, I would have simply said, well, had a happy childhood, nothing to complain about, all good. But going through therapy, I noticed some of my struggles, and I noticed where they're coming from and how they're affecting my life still until today. And I have to admit, it destabilized me at first, and I cried over things I didn't know I still had to cry over. I even invited my mother to my own therapy session. But going through all that made me a more well-rounded person. And I'm saying this because I want you to know that psychotherapy is not just for the people with mental illness. It's for everybody, and it can help you to grow and even self-actualize. So let's get into some of the most mind-blowing insights that I learned along the way. So it doesn't really matter which topic you want to work on in a therapy context, the pattern is usually pretty similar. I want to share that one with you because it also helps you to understand what therapy is about. So, a couple of examples. There's always a pain point, for example, procrastination. The interesting thing is that it might be not most valuable to just push through that and build habits and set goals, but to actually take a deeper look. And usually you will find that below every pain point, there's some sort of wound. The word trauma is just Greek and means wound. That's the translation. We, for example, notice, you had super critical parents in your childhood. And for a child, of course, that's very painful if you constantly get criticized and you constantly feel like you're not good enough. As a child, anyway, you tend to be narcissistic in this way that you always feel like this is because of me. My parents got divorced, or maybe that's because of me. I'm always being criticized, or maybe they're right, this is about me, I'm not good enough. And though human beings are very smart and competent, you come up with a coping strategy. It's basically a solution attempt. And you maybe internalize this huge perfectionist. The idea is that you criticize yourself first before others can, right? You constantly get criticized. You're like, I can't do this anymore. I'm not good enough. I have to improve. I have to be better. So then you set yourself high standards. Maybe I criticize myself first. So then my parents and anybody else is not criticizing me anymore. And since it was such a painful experience and you are really dependent on the love of your parents, literally, otherwise you would die if you wouldn't have them, right? So this is very important. And that's why you come up with this perfectionist side. Though there are always side effects. And the side effect in this way is procrastination. Why? Because you put so much pressure on you all the time. This is so difficult. This is so stressful to constantly be a perfectionist and set those high standards that at some point you find a way to just procrastinate and relieve a little bit of the stress once in a while. And maybe this procrastination becomes even a much bigger thing. And that's a side effect, which is basically, again, the pain point here, why you're in therapy. Another example, anxiety. Wound might be, again, just an example, also critical parents. I deliberately choose the same example here because I want you to see that same childhoods or same wounds can lead to different symptoms. And also the other way around. You can have same side effects and same symptoms, but they're actually originating in different ways. But here is an example. Again, your parents been super critical and you just noticed, I always got to be alert. I always trying to prevent judgment and rejection. And that's why you just in this hyper alert state all the time. And that's a way, of course, to also prevent any criticism. But also the side effect here is that you burn out. Because in your job, you do the same. You're always hyper alert, always try to do it right. And you're tired because of that. Maybe you already have a high blood pressure. And maybe that's why you start going to therapy, saying, oh, I'm like an anxious person, or I feel like I'm depressed, but there's not really a reason. But again, you take a closer look, you notice there's a wound, and you're trying to cope with that. Now, an interesting thing is that often in therapy, people want action steps. What do I have to do now? I have to do it right. And sometimes that is very valuable, but you have to understand as a therapist, maybe my client is just using the coping strategy here, just being a perfectionist, doing it right all the time. And now he goes to therapy or she wants to do it right again in therapy. And what are the steps I need to do it correctly to let go of my perfectionism or whatever? And then just giving people action steps is actually counterproductive because you just push their coping strategy, which is actually leading them in the exact same direction where they're coming from, right? So here you got to be wise and maybe tackle though the wound, right? Because if the wound is healed, you don't have this need of this coping strategy anymore. Another interesting example is bulimia. I summarize it too simple, but just so you get it roughly. Basically, you have moments where you eat a lot and then you purge that. The wound here might be your parents have been divorced when you were like a child, maybe 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You stayed with your mom. She was very overwhelmed, cried a lot. As a coping strategy, you noticed, well, since back in the days, since the divorce, I did not talk about my emotions because I felt like I'm already a burden and my mom is struggling so much. I have to stay rational and strong to stabilize my mom, which is great because you're stabilizing the family. In some way, this was probably also the best way to receive love because your mom was emotionally receptive when you were there with her and stabilized her, and not when you're also struggling because she's overwhelmed with that. And also on top of that, you learned, well, I always need to not show emotions, but I need to let them out as well. So you started to use that throwing up strategy to regulate your emotions. And the idea really here is that back in the days when you were a child, you've been overwhelmed. You don't know much about life. You don't know much about emotion regulation. So probably this coping strategy was the best strategy you had back in the days. And the problem just is that you use that still until today. Now you're an adult, you still feel maybe guilty for the divorce, you feel guilty for your own emotions generally. Also physical health is a thing, when you purge a lot, some side effects come with that. And maybe you do have even relationship issues because you avoid showing emotions, you don't want to be a burden, and this unfolds in your current life as well. And you haven't noticed that yet, that you're an adult now. You can develop new strategies, but you just stick with the old one, which was a solution attempt back in the days, but it comes with a lot of side effects. And that's what we're working on, and the side effects are basically the pain point, why we are in therapy. So the important point is always there's a wound, and you tried to cope with that. But this coping strategy has some side effects, and that's where the suffering is coming from. Last example, self-esteem. Let's take a similar example again. Maybe your mom has just been depressed generally. Maybe your parents are still together. Your dad worked a lot, but your mom was very present, but very depressed. And you noticed, I care for her all the time. That makes me feel more connected to her because she's just lying in bed all day long. She's not really connecting with me, but I can connect with her by caring a lot. And as a side effect, well, you inhibit your own desires. You become a people pleaser. And again, as a child, you tend to be narcissistic, thinking, oh, my mom is depressed. Maybe that's because of me, right? So this word narcissism, I use this in a different context here. It's just a bit self-centered, which is normal. A child is like that. They think, oh, maybe I am the burden here. Maybe my mom is depressed because of me. I need to be more pleasing and show less of my own desires. And nowadays you're a people pleaser. You feel unhappy about that. Maybe You feel even depressed about that, but for sure there are some self-esteem issues going on. Let's talk about some specific examples how to resolve that. As an example, I love to use the strategy and the tool of chair work. So basically the idea is that you have different parts within you. Maybe this wound that you're having is still this little child that feels lonely and actually depressed. But then you have another side within you, which is this coping strategy. Well, I gotta be strong, I gotta be a perfectionist, for example, all the time. And even clients share with you this inner conflict that they're having, that maybe they're lazy and tired, but then they're very hard on themselves and they're pushing themselves all the time and they're not very nice to themselves. And then we actually set up 2 chairs and people start actually having a conversation with themselves. Maybe they sit on the perfectionist side and then they say, well, I feel good here, I feel great. This is the problem over there. Okay, interesting. Can you tell that this side? We do like a little role play and they say, oh no, this is weird. Can you nevertheless do it? Then you turn around and say, you're the problem. I don't like you. Please leave my life. Then they switch the chair to this depressed, tired side, the lonely side. And then they say, well, maybe they don't get angry at all. Maybe over time they get angry and say, well, what are you doing? Like, we're the same team and my feelings are real. Why are you always putting me down, right? And then an interesting discussion comes up and basically the idea is to integrate all sides. Another idea and tool I love to use is inner child work. Because over time, when we notice those patterns, I love to also talk about specific examples. Because if you talk about specific examples in their life, also emotions get evoked. You don't just want to talk big picture. And maybe there is this representative example of I was 9, I was crying in my room, my mom opened the door and she just shouted at me again and left, and I was sitting there alone, and this was basically really very painful. And we noticed maybe that's just a representative example of what happened, this wound. And then we actually do a visualization. We visualize, you actually go back in time, go to that house or apartment, open the main door, go up the stairs, open your room, and you see that little child there. You walk up to that, give that child a hug, you tell that child what that child needs to hear and what nobody told that child back then, but somebody should have. And you say that out loud. And then you give that child what it needs. Maybe you go out and play a little bit. Maybe you actually go downstairs and talk to the mother in your visualization saying, hey, you're neglecting this child, whatever. But the idea is you're meeting your wounded place with compassion. Healing comes when you meet your wounded place with compassion. You meet that place, you go there, you see that painful child there that suffers, and you meet it with compassion. You hug it and you tell her what he or she needs to hear. That's often also, how this healing simply comes, and then you just, in a relaxed way, you don't have this need anymore to use that coping strategy, maybe this perfectionist side, or maybe being depressed or anxious, or even like suffering from bulimia or whatever it is, right? It falls away naturally. You don't need to push this away. I have to learn how to be nicer. No, we gotta actually just understand where this is coming from and heal from that. Though I want to share, sometimes confrontation is also a very good thing. Again, with perfectionism, if people, maybe they go through a depressive episode, but they still have like super high standards. They say, I need to perform at this level. Well, then I tell them, well, if you want to run a marathon and you broke your leg, you're not going to say, well, I need to keep running and finish this marathon. You notice I need a break for a couple of months and retreat. Now, you're going through this phase right now, but you still have your standards up here. That's the same. You are stubborn, I feel like. And that also often resonates with clients. Now, you don't just always do that. You just see a little bit what the client needs. And it's also very important that you don't share this out of anger as a therapist. You share this out of love, but we'll talk about this later in this video. But confrontation sometimes can be also very helpful, and it makes people understand, like, oh, true, like he's right. Nobody shared it that way. And then we can start working maybe on the inner child work and the chair work. And confrontation can be also very powerful. Sometimes I even like to invite people. Maybe we talked about the mother or the father. Maybe we cried over this again and started understanding patterns already. And then suddenly the rubber meets the road and we say, great, Let's invite your mom. Let's talk about this together. Often, great change happens just within a session by calling things out we never did, being very understanding why the mother acted back in the days, because she had also a very good reason and she also had a childhood that shaped herself. And just nurturing understanding and connectedness can be very powerful. I often do this even with entrepreneurs. They invite their mom and their dad, and this improves their business at the end of the day. Yeah, and there are many more tools. I don't want to bore you with that. Over time, I get less and less tool-oriented. And I notice really it's just more about the space we create and the things we share. Sometimes having this tool and saying, now we do this visualization or now we do this exercise. Sometimes I feel like coaches and therapists are doing this because they need clarity and okay, this is the clarity of the session, we do that. But sometimes you need to be okay with feeling helpless and not knowing the patterns and just allowing the session to evolve. And then at the right time, you can have a couple of tools, a couple of exercises, and yeah, that might be the most fruitful thing. And there are many more exercises, but just sharing them and sharing the big picture is not as helpful as actually going to coaching and therapy in this context here, and experiencing it yourself by having a clear topic. And then at the right time, there's the right tool that evokes emotions, that evokes insight, and it's not as powerful to just summarize it. So that's just a little big picture right here, and let's move on to the next chapter. I want to share an example so you can understand how potentially your parents are affecting your life, and also your grandparents, and potentially even your grandparents. So basically, the idea is that there is transgenerational transmission happening. This is just a random example. In your life, of course, it will be totally different, but I want you to get the point. This is a tree diagram. In psychology, we call this a so-called genogram. The squares are the guys, the circles are women. Double square means that this is the client. So just imagine you are a 30-year-old guy in this example. You have a father that is 60 years old, right? So the numbers are the ages. You have a mother that's 52. You also have a younger sister, right? The sister is already married and she has a daughter herself. And of course, your mother also has a father and a mother. Those are your grandparents. Those are your grandparents from your father's side. Your father is a single child. Your mother had a brother, but he died already. And your grandparents from your father's side, they divorced already. This is about the relationships. The green color here in the double stripe means that there's a close relationship. This one means that there's a more distant relationship, and this means that there's basically conflict going on. So you, for example, come to therapy and we quickly notice, oh, your mother, throughout your entire childhood, even until today, is very overprotective and over-controlling. And as a result, you're nowadays more withdrawing. So you don't really have a beautiful relationship going on because your mother is always overprotective. Watch out, you have to care about this, and you should really make sure you do this correctly, and as a result you withdraw. But then your mother just becomes even more overreactive, like, wait, listen to me, why are you not listening? And basically this escalates quickly. And we notice also throughout the sessions that this quite had an effect on you as a child, because if you're a 6-year-old child, just want to be free and play, and there's always something you do wrong and always something you need to do different, of course it affects you. Maybe you get anxiety, maybe even depression, but for sure this is disturbing for a child. Now we notice over the sessions that your mother also had quite some struggles going on. Her brother, she was really close with her brother, died very early when she was still a child. Her mother was also very difficult, potentially some narcissistic tendencies, as we figure it out over the sessions. So basically your mother built up a lot of anxiety herself and also fear of losing people that are close. Now, and she's trying to cope with that anxiety by now being very overprotective of the people and things she loves. So she really wants to make sure that she keeps you in your life. The problem is, she's always having anxiety whenever somebody's doing something that is a little risky or that is just independent. And she's so overprotective, disturbing your childhood and your life and how it affected you. But this was never about you. Actually, your mother should have done a therapy 20 years ago dealing with that anxiety, because she feels so much anxiety, which leads to being more controlling and more security oriented, but way too much that she is even overprotective, affecting you. And that started in her childhood, even also with her mother, because when her brother died, she did not have really the core support. She always felt like she's not good enough. And the interesting thing is you feel the same right now as well, because as a child you noticed, I'm always doing something wrong. I'm always thinking not about something. I have to do something more. I'm not good enough. And that's basically transgenerational transmission. Another example, we can go here to the other side. Your father has been the only child. His parents divorced very early on when he was 8. So father basically left and he had a close relationship with the mother. The mother though was overwhelmed, she cried a lot, and he early on experienced the so-called parentification, coming from parent. So he early on became a parent, it became the father and stepped up and basically stabilized the mother by being strong, not showing emotions, listening to her, and not sharing his own struggles, more like hiding them. And he really learned to just be the tough guy, basically. He had to. He didn't want to, but he somehow had to evolve into that. Well, as a result, he didn't really know how to build a close relationship with his own daughter. The father basically became emotionally unavailable, and the daughter, of course, struggled with that. She always felt like she's not good enough, she has to do something more, which she is doing nowadays. She's 28, running her own business, already having a husband, already having a child. She's trying to be the perfect daughter in the hope that at some point her father will suddenly give her the love, give her a hug and be like, hey, I love you and you're good enough and I'm really proud of you. That's one of the hypotheses, by the way. Again, when I'm talking about this stuff, it's also just ideas and hypotheses, and we work with that throughout the session, sometimes even share them very openly. I am personally very open with my clients, and we just kind of like figure it out, what like hits the nail on the spot and what not. Another interesting hypothesis, I just want to share this, since your sister had this unavailable father, I mean, you had the same thing, that's a whole nother story. But basically, she's now also going for guys that are emotionally unavailable. The idea is that you don't love what you need, but you love what you're used to. And also the idea is that here you always try to be good enough with your father, but never receive the love. A child, again, is by nature more narcissistic in that way, that she thinks, oh, that's probably because of me, I have to do something different. Now, whenever she meets a guy that reminds her of her dad subconsciously, she's like, oh, maybe this time I can finish the loop. Maybe this time I can do something. Maybe this time I can tame the wild horse and he will love me for who I am. The problem is that you never received the love from your dad, so you really idealize this feeling of finally being loved by a man. You idolize it so much that it's not even realistic. And whenever you meet another guy that is actually a loving guy, it kind of feels boring to you. It's like, oh, no, that's not it, because you idolize this feeling so much. And whenever you get together with an emotionally unavailable guy, then you still keep the hope of, no, maybe this time I can do it right, and then this will be so amazing. And potentially, whenever you do it right and the guy actually commits to you, you kind of get bored again, maybe you hop into another relationship, but you always find the actually true loving guy is kind of boring, because you have this idea that this is so perfect and it must be so amazing, because you're basically walking through the desert again over days without water, and you're really seeking that love, and you feel like, if I drink one glass of water, this will be super amazing. But you idolize that feeling so much. Now, the idea here in therapy would be that you actually accept that your father will never change. Potentially you can get angry about him, and you start to give yourself that love and not constantly seeking it from outside. And that's basically then the goal for therapy, right? I often do this with my clients in the beginning, and then we notice where our stuff coming from. Then we basically notice, okay, this is what we're going to work on. Let's do that work and go on that path. Yeah. By the way, because again, just an example, the daughter is always trying to do it right and perfect. She never really allowed herself to be angry about her father, because anger would mean that she would love her even less, and that he would love her even less. So she's never allowing herself to be angry. But the interesting thing is, with her daughter, she often gets very angry, and she even feels a little shame and guilt about that she feels like sometimes I'm unfair towards my daughter. When she's like free and doing whatever she wants, maybe there might be even some negative feelings of, wait, my daughter is free and is just laughing out loud and doing whatever she wants. I never was allowed to do that. And then she gets like angry, and basically the anger comes out here. And again, the poor little child, because this is not about her. This is about her suppressed feelings, always needing to be strong. This is about her father always needing to be strong. And this is about the divorce that they never really has properly discussed with your father, basically. And this is just basically transmissioning over time. Yeah, transgenerational transmission basically happening here. Here in this case, it's always the same, right? The father had to be strong, not showing emotions. Well, the daughter also has to be strong and perfect. And probably the daughter gets the same feeling. Okay, just an example. Why do we do this genogram? First of all, to understand where is this coming from. It's also very helpful that for example here, that at first you get angry about your mother and be like, hey, why is she doing this? This is not about me. And you feel anger at first. This can be very helpful. But then also we want to take the grandparents' perspective into account and understand, why is your mother the way she is? There's a reason for that as well. And then on top of that, even feel some compassion. At some point, we even invite, for example, the mother to the therapy session. There's always great change happening. And ultimately, we can change patterns, because this pattern is not only happening in her childhood, and in his childhood, but also in this case, it still is happening today. So by inviting the mother, talking about that, getting to the core, potentially even the relationship nowadays is going to be changed. Yeah. So that's a huge game changer for a lot of clients. I even do this with entrepreneurs. With some entrepreneurs, we even invite the mother or the father, and that tangibly changes the business and the way they actually get into relationships, the way they talk with their employees and their co-founders. And that's tremendous, change that is happening, because we're getting to the root cause of where are things coming from. Okay, I hope that made sense. When you think about therapy, you probably don't expect your therapist to experience all kinds of emotions during the session. But we do, we're human beings, and we can even make use of that if we are mindful. We can feel pressured if our client is constantly asking for action steps. We can feel pity if our client is sharing their suffering in a very helpless way. And yes, we can also feel angry if we constantly get interrupted. I categorized the type of emotions you can feel as a therapist into 3 categories. The first one is my own emotion. So for example, there's a client with ADHD, he's talking a lot, he's really taking over the session. And I once noticed I got angry about this. And I thought, man, I'm gonna interrupt you so much. You're not gonna take over this session today. And I didn't do that yet. I just noticed I'm feeling this anger. And then I suddenly noticed before that anger, a thought popped up, which was, oh, Marco, you're such a people pleaser. And of course, even in your job, your clients take over your session. And that got me angry. And I noticed, wait, that's my own topic. I got to work on that myself with my therapist, with my coach, do my own work and my own homework. I should not bring my own struggles into a session with my client. So I didn't share that feeling because that has nothing to do here in this session. Actually, what I did is I just noticed that emotion. I didn't push it away. I just noticed it, but I didn't act on it. So I didn't interrupt my client as much. I still did to a healthy degree, I felt like, just setting the boundaries, but not out of anger. That's the difference. And that's also the beautiful thing here as a therapist, that you can passively learn while giving therapy. You notice what is coming up. Is this now my emotion? Is this not my emotion? But if it's your own emotion, it's important to not bring that into this context of therapy, but just noticing it. The second category is about my client's emotions. So for example, there's a client, very rational, very entrepreneurial, and over the sessions, we start to get deeper and deeper, and suddenly we end up at a very emotional point. The very first time he's crying and he's really showing himself emotional. And he was not even done crying, and he started already turning around this focus from him towards me, asking me, well, what are now the next steps? What do we do now with this emotion? How are we moving forward? And I noticed I feel suddenly helpless and I feel overwhelmed. I didn't expect that. We were sitting here with those emotions. We were right in the therapy process. And suddenly he turned so demanding. And I noticed this helplessness and feeling overwhelmed. And only after the session, looking backwards, I noticed, wait, maybe this feeling of helplessness and feeling overwhelmed, maybe that was the emotion of my client. And maybe that's valuable feedback, because maybe I went a little too fast. Maybe I was a bit too demanding towards my client. Maybe that was a little too much for him. All that focus on him, this emotion, feeling helpless and overwhelmed and weak in that sense. And he couldn't handle that anymore. At some point, he just turned it around and put the focus on me and said, Marco, what's the next step? And suddenly, basically, he put his emotions into me because it was too much for him. Maybe that's valuable feedback. And also, it might be, and this is just a hypothesis, you got to work with this over time and then notice whether it fits or not. It might be that actually going with that demand and trying to please my client and give him now action steps, maybe that's the wrong way. Because I would give my client the feeling that, yes, those emotions you're feeling right now are way too much. We can't handle that. We need to push them away right now very quickly and find some action steps. And maybe the most productive thing in this moment would be to actually slow down even more, right? You notice, oh, I feel overwhelmed, I feel helpless. Maybe my client feels this as well and he doesn't want to feel that, so he's pushing it away, he's becoming demanding. Let's sit with those feelings. Let's give this client the feeling that, hey, we can hold those emotions. Let's do that together. I am here for you. And again, you don't have to share that insight. But in some cases, it's also helpful to actually share them right in the moment or maybe afterwards. Like, hey, what's going on right now? We're just here with your emotions. I feel like it's beautiful that you're opening up and now you're suddenly putting the focus on me. What is going on here? It might be interesting to also share that, but use that information as a therapist. What's going on here? And it helps you to be more empathetic. Like, oh, my client might feel that way. Interesting. Maybe I should slow a little down. Maybe I should go a little faster, depending on the context. And the third category are the emotions of your client's relationships. So maybe you feel something that everybody else or most people in his private life feel the same. Maybe his girlfriend, maybe his friends feel the same. For example, there's a very clingy and needy client, and you notice it's getting a little too personal. I have this tendency of pushing my client a little bit away, having a little bit this ick feeling. And you might think as a therapist, just as a hypothesis, maybe I'm not the only one thinking that way. Maybe his girlfriend feels the same way. Maybe his friends as well. Maybe the friends he never had because they're always pushing away because it's getting too close for them. And it might be very valuable information to share this as a therapist. Maybe, and again, this is just a hypothesis, there are many different hypotheses. In his childhood, his parents did not give him that love. So he basically was walking around empty, very thirsty, like somebody walking through the desert for days without drinking water, and he becomes very needy, and he's still expecting to get that love from somebody else. Not just his parents. Now he walks through life, and whenever there's a relationship that gets a little close, he's becoming clingy, like, oh, maybe this is the one where I can get the love. So it becomes also a self-fulfilling prophecy because he's so clingy and everybody pushes him away and he's like, I don't get my love. But also it might be valuable to notice I'm an adult right now and I can give that love to myself. And that's also the goal of therapy, that you don't continuously put yourself in this victim mindset, trying to get something from others, but you yourself feel healthy. And of course, you still need valuable relationships, but you're not that clingy anymore. And it might be valuable to share that with the client and maybe simply ask, hey, I'm feeling that way. I'm wondering whether your partner sometimes feels the same way. And that can be quite confrontative by saying that. But the important thing is that the client feels that you say this in a very optimistic and loving way, right? It's not so much about what you say, but it's more about the entire attitude that you're spreading, not just in the very moment, throughout all the sessions. If the client notices you're loving, you're optimistic, you want the best for them, they can usually take this, and that's valuable information that you can use for this process in the therapy sessions. So those are the 3 types of categories. Is it my own emotion, my own struggle? Is that maybe a feeling that my client feels right now and he's just putting that inside of me? Or is that a feeling that I'm just not the only one feeling that way? Maybe other people in his social circle feel the same, and we can use that as information to improve his life. Let me know if you're interested in gaining more insights about psychotherapy, because there is so much more to share. And if you want to experience therapy yourself, or maybe it's not therapy, maybe it's coaching or simply a topic you want to work on in a one-on-one setting, then don't hesitate to reach out. There is a link below the video. And finally, I want to share some of the most powerful quotes that I read throughout the years regarding psychotherapy. And with that being said, have a good journey.